Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to Topic 5, Unit 1. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, phrasing always takes me back to attending games at Angel Stadium, seeing the California Angels. Back in the day, they're still called the California Angels. Play baseball there in Southern California. Today, we're talking about the sporting dimension of political organizations, sort of in contrast to Topic 3, where we looked at the political dimensions of sporting organizations. And in that vein, we're going to shift here to talking about IGOs instead of NGOs. So an IGO is an intergovernmental organization. It's simply a structure to which governments formally belong, right? So non-governmental organizations are those to which governments do not belong, right? They're non-governmental. So this is intergovernment. You could probably talk about intragovernmental organizations if you wanted to. That would confuse things. That's sort of different groups within the same government. So you'd have the State Department and the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Homeland Security. They're all sort of intragovernmental when they get together. They're within the same government. This is intergovernmental, I-N-T-E-R. That's between governments. So the one that's most well known is the United Nations. It's a broad, general IGO. Their goals are overarching, generally speaking, to maintain world peace and to promote the common cause amongst the countries of the world. There are things then to which countries decide to join. If they at all can, they seek membership, can and want. Sometimes the organization doesn't want them where they're willing to sort of trade their right to do whatever it is that they want for some sort of perceived benefit. There's several others, I mean, there's loads of others, but they come together on different sorts of structures. So we'll start on the far right here. NATO is one of these. This is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is an IGO dedicated to common defense. So this is the group of countries, the US, Canada, and many Western European nations. Their whole purpose was to sort of stand united in the face of a perceived threat. Actually, at the time, it was a real threat, the Soviet Union. They didn't want the Soviets to get any ideas about attacking any one of them, so they made this common defense treaty that said if you attack one, you attack us all, we're all coming for you. So it's an IGO dedicated strictly to common defense. There's ones that are dedicated strictly to common culture, common religion. This is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. There's a map there with the places in the world where the states are that are part of the OIC. They have a very narrow mandate. Their job isn't to do common defense. Their job isn't to do sort of general peace and security like the United Nations. Their job is to promote sort of common goals of having positive perception and good interactions of people and countries of Muslim faith around the world, so the OIC. The G7 is one that's primarily economic in nature. They're the G7, the group of 7 countries, the 7 largest economies. Well, they were the 7 largest economies when they joined. There's things that are changing as we go forward. There's also a G8 that has Russia. Right now, the G7's mad at Russia, so that it went from G7 to G8 and back to G7. There's a G20 that has the 20 largest economies. You start seeing flags of Brazil and of India and of Indonesia and several other states like that in the G20. These are trying to promote common cause through on economic matters. Now, these can do all sorts of things, right? There's no end here. Just like there was almost no end to the NGOs, there's fewer IGOs, but there's still a very broad range of what they do. And a lot of them try to use sports to accomplish their aims. So you're not going to see much from the G7 in terms of using sport to try and do something, but you would see, as happened a couple last year when they're having G8 meetings where the members were all watching World Cup games because their countries were involved. But in IGOs and sports, these sorts of IGOs do turn to sport. You have some that turn more readily to them than others because their mandates are tied to them nicely. So one of the many UN agencies is UNICEF, the UN agency for United Nations Children's Fund. Used to stand for the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, became the United Nations Children's Fund. They kept the acronym because it is one that people recognize, and away you go. So they frequently turn to sport and play as a reason to, or as a means of organizing and trying to accomplish their aims. Because their mandate to work with youth means they also believe in the power of play, and they'll use that. So you'll see later on in the class that they've partnered with club sports teams around the world to do things, and they're linked often. The UN Office on Sport for Development and Peace is a relatively new idea, new concept. It's one we'll look at heavily in Unit 4 of this class. But obviously, an office that said it's the Office on Sport for Development and Peace is going to use sport. Now, one of the most interesting things out there to me where sports and and IGOs and sports and governments come together is the World Anti-Doping Agency. We'll also look at this again later, but it's sort of a hybrid between an IGO and an NGO because it sort of has three equal partners. It has the sporting bingos that we looked at before. It has the countries of the world coming together in an IGO, and it has scientists as equals. And it's a very interesting sort of hybrid where they're going to work together to combat doping and to sort of idea to play true. Now, to give you an idea of the specific programs that are out there, there's a whole bunch. You've got this great picture of famous footballers around the world who were teaming up with different parts of the UN structure there. You've got the UN AIDS Agency, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations Development Program, in a comic book to talk about the importance of poverty eradication and achieving what were called the Millennium Development Goals, which existed from 2000 to 2015. They're trying to communicate to a broad popular audience, both illiterate adults and children who would be interested in the comic book approach. It was published in a multitude of languages, and they're trying to say, here's how we do this together. Up here on the top right, you've got something that happens pretty much annually. It's called the United Nations Development Program Match Against Poverty. So they're going to use this high-profile footballers, sometimes retired footballers. This is Ronaldo of Brazil and Zinedine Zidane of France, who were sort of the captains of these games and playing. They have them once a year. They try and have a very big, high-profile event that raises a lot of money and does poverty eradication. And then you've got this from the UN Women's Organization. This is a very famous athlete from Morocco. She's more famous outside than inside. Her experience was winning she was the first Muslim woman to win a gold medal in the Olympics. It was in 1984. So now she works to sort of promote this sort of idea of inclusion, sports with boys and girls, and that's a pretty big statement in a lot of the world where girls are still prevented from playing sports, which we'll also talk about more later. Okay, so how does this come together from the IGO down to the specific country level? I know I whipped through that pretty fast. Again, feel free to shoot me questions. Just the idea is that IGOs exist, and a lot of times they turn to sport to try and accomplish their goals. But the countries within the IGOs are always turning to sport. And one of the main things we'll talk about in units 2 and 3 is how those things play together. This is just going to be a really brief overview of some of the ways in which this takes place. Oh, sorry about that. We'll start here. So in most countries around the world, I haven't gone through and counted, but I really should do that in some summer sometime. In most countries around the world, there is a cabinet level position in charge of sports. Sometimes sports and culture, sometimes youth and sports, a lot of times just sport. What does cabinet level mean? So the President of the United States has a cabinet. These are the people who sit almost daily and give him or her advice and consult with him or her about the direction the country should take. These are the sort of the most connected people in the country directly into the president and the executive branch. In the United States, you can look down that list there and see the kinds of people who are in charge. This is listed in order of their line of succession to the presidency. Some of you may be fans of the rebooted Battlestar Galactica, where you end up with this president who was a minor figure in education. She was so far down in the list of who could take charge, but she was in the list. So you're talking about who's in the list of who could become the President of the United States. And this doesn't have everybody, it's just the people who are in the cabinet. Okay, so you've got the Vice President, the Department of State, those are the people who are in charge of international relations. Department of the Treasury, that's our money. Department of Defense, that's our, makes sense, right? Common Defense, Justice, Interior, Agriculture, etc., on and on. Read down that list. You will see that we do not have a Ministry of Sport. But in most countries, there is a Minister of Sport, that sport is at the highest level sitting in consult with the President or the Prime Minister or the leader, however they're defined there. Now, this is interesting because you have these sporting bingos who are going to claim to be apolitical, right? And they're going to require governments not to mess with sport. But the governments themselves have a minister of sport whose job it is to, guess what, mess with sport. That's sort of their job, right? That's the mandate. They're sort of seeing how sport can be harnessed to achieve the aims of the government, to achieve the aims of the country, what can be achieved. And we'll look at some of those things that can be achieved later on. So you've got a presidential level. So it's pretty impossible to say that these things, that the sport is going to stay out of politics if most countries have politics, sport and politics embedded together in this ministry or in the secretariat. In the United States, again, we don't have one of those. We do have and have had a lot other kinds of things that our governments or someone in the government has promoted in terms of being healthy. And you'll see in the next unit, there's certainly a lot of times where the president and others look to sport. So that would lead to the idea then is how does this play together? Can they be autonomous sport like the way the sporting bingos want if the governments have something to do with sport? So here's an example. This is the Indian Olympic Association, which is job it is to prepare Indian athletes to go to international competition. And you may have looked on in the member states comparison about where India would rank in terms of its medals per capita, both in income and in size, and it doesn't do very well. They don't win a lot of medals despite their huge size. But this is them attempting to be independent. So if you take money from the government, it's hard to say you're autonomous, that you can do things on your own. And in 2010, then the Indian Olympic Association said, no more, we won't take any more money, we're going to be autonomous. So there are states like that. In the United States, we don't have federal backing for the Olympic teams either. But in a country like Australia, you've got an Australian Sports Commission, right? There's the Australian government, that's the executive sort of thing. There's a ministry or commission level sports commission, and then something called the Australian Institute for Sport, or AIS. And they've got a program through government funding to produce this. So look at this list of things that they're trying to achieve, and you'll see that they've got a very serious, very concerted branch of the government that's going to be working on Olympic related projects. Why would they do that? It's because they, and we'll talk about this again later in the class, they're looking to show the success, the greatness of Australia with sports as a tangible example. It matters to the people in Australia. They think it matters in defining themselves. Therefore, sport is going to be out there very properly. Again, another way in which it's going to be hard for FIFA or for the IOC or for anybody else to say this isn't political. You've got the Australian government investing heavily to try and finish this winning edge program. Let's go back to that suspending federation slide. This is where FIFA was attempting to keep sports, the politicians, the governments out of sports, and they've got suspension in their corner. In other words, what they can do is say, we're going to suspend you if you don't do what we say, and it doesn't matter what the overall goal of the country is in relation to sport. FIFA has the power. The IOC has the power, right? They can suspend you, and then you can't participate in the games. Neither club teams, nor athletes, nor Olympic teams. Okay, so in this case, Nigeria did get suspended. The government took the Football Association, the Nigerian Football Federation employees, they arrested them. They put them in court, and FIFA then so suspended. They said this is interference. Nigeria said they were trying to clean up corruption in the FA. FIFA said it doesn't matter. You can't mess with your sporting federation. We suspend you. They dropped the court cases because the people in Nigeria went crazy. They were not happy that Nigeria could be kicked out of soccer. So they were suspended. They pulled the court case back. Portugal, their club situation, the Football Association made up of their clubs at all kinds of levels. They didn't want to do what FIFA wanted them to do in their statutes. So Portugal was threatened with suspension from all sporting soccer competitions, and they gave in. So they dropped the lawsuit. They approved the statutes. Togo was actually attacked. Their bus was attacked by terrorists, and we'll look at that example later. But after they were attacked, the driver was killed, a doctor was killed, a backup goalkeeper was wounded. Everyone had been shot at with submachine guns on the way to a tournament in Angola. The president said, "Come home," because the president said, "Come home." Not the president of the Football Association, the president of the country. They were deemed to have interfered. The government had interfered in sport. They were suspended. They were suspended by the Regional Federation, the African Federation for sport, for politics meddling in sport. So on the one hand, in the first time you see, oh, that sounds really good that you could try and keep politics out of sport and that they'll use these suspensions to control them. On the other hand, there's some real reasons why some of these governments will want to get involved in sport sometimes, right? And so the suspending federation, you have to look at and see what's actually going on and see if it's an unfair power. I mean, one thing that happens sometimes is that democracies have more trouble staying out of sporting federations where they're trying to clean up corruption and stuff than command economies or command political systems where it's their cronies in there anyway, so you don't have to mess because they're your buddies. All right, so let's come back to this. Takeaway, political organizations often turn to sports either to accomplish their aims, to get something done, or to promote their own ideals, and they care what sporting bingos do. Feel free to be in touch. Cheers.